Okay, greeting YouTubers. So we're on Facebook on Kwanzaa every day, and our Umoja Caribbean Union YouTube page is UCU. That's the letters UCU, Umoja Caribbean Union. And we are here as one of our Kwanzaa Everyday initiatives, African Heritage Study Group, in which we read every Wednesday, um, except the first Wednesday of the month. And we have been reading the book written by Mario C. Moorhead, which is Crucian Dialogues. And Crucian Dialogues can be found on Amazon and also on the island of St. Croix by contacting 340-277-7485. My name is Shalima Edwards, and sitting by me is.
Russ Malachi.
All right, so we are on our marathon tonight, in which we'll be reading for an hour and a half, and then we will dive into reasoning session. So, okay, give me a quick second, and you can just say what page you're reading on, please.
Tonight we'll be reading from page 250. Yeah, and I would be reading the portion me, and Shalima will be reading she.
All right.
Um, and we'll be going till the end of the book,
Well,
which
not the end of
the
the
end of
book.
the chapter, which the chapter ends at 297, and so we basically have 40, 41 and a quarter and a half, maybe, pages before we complete that chapter.
And we will surely do our best.
We'll read as far as we can read tonight, and then we'll just have our quick discussion.
255. Okay.
255, 254,
We
or
ended here.
255. Okay, so we'll start at 255. So Shalima will be reading she. Let's go.
Help me out here. Do you mean that from the time the Unity Party won the 1962 elections with Doc James and Patrick Williams, this was the sum total of the response from a political party targeted by an aggressive rival? It's really hard to accept that been so resultant by a white man just because he could convincingly talk like one of us. Was that his only talent? What else could he do? What were his accomplishments as the leader of the Prussian Democrats?
I can pretty much guarantee that, however, he might answer your question, he won't count Victory 66 as one of his successes. It was an ignominious defeat by any measure. Only the five St. Croix district candidates were successful. Ron DeLuga suffered his first political defeat, and it was decisive. He trailed RDS by 102 votes.
So St. Croix finally woke up to the confidence game Mango Jones scores. Way too late to correct that damage that would have already been done. But at least it gives people like me hope that despite our darkest hour, hope springs eternal in the consciousness of Prussian people.
I would very much like to agree with you, but you seem to think that episode represented the end of the man's political career. If that's what you are thinking, I hate to have to tell you that while it marked the end of his local career, it turned out to be the beginning of his longest representative in Washington and as our delegate to Congress.
How did that happen? I really thought that was the end of the line for the imposter. Do you mean we actually gave the man a new lease in an even more prestigious role? Unbelievable.
To be thoroughly candid about the position he got, This was the age when our people had publicly declared that office required a white person. Our consciousness concluded no black person could represent us in Washington as effectively as a white man. And it became an accepted truth that played out in reality. Some of our most popular and have challenged him for the position. Randeluga never came close to losing a contest for the position in DC.
I'm not sure I'm following. You said he lost victory 66 election. Then when I concluded his political career was over, you said he got elected to represent us in Washington. I assumed that would have been the next election cycle in 68. But you never said who was in that office. Would have been to gain the office?
This time it was definitely my fault for rushing the brush. I led you forward with the logo without supplying the information as to how he got there. Let me back up. The 1966 elections could easily be described as a funeral service, as the funeral services of the Democratic Party that were based on St. Croix. From that point forward, the Democratic Party became a political garment that the Unity Party fought for, won, and wears proudly as the dominant political faction of the Virgin Islands. So complete has been the transformation that, as you very know, today most people think it's always been that way.
No joke about that. People will argue with you that Otley was the one who brought the Democratic Party to the Virgin Islands.
Yes, I know that only too well. But the fact is that after the 66 debacle, Ron DeLuga led his former Democrats, the losers as well as the winners, to sue for peace. He argued it was the right thing to do and was to condemn the party led party.
You can't be serious. After all of that, the first time he tastes defeat, his response is to join the winners. Oh, no way. What kind of conviction was that? And he got the others to follow him? That was downright shameful. I know I couldn't do that.
Well, the rank and file of the defeated party wouldn't do it either, while even the victorious district senators switched they viewed as treason. Those were the people who would eventually end up being the founding members of what would become the Independent Citizen Movement political party.
Now I'm seeing the light. The white man was in it for the ride. When the vehicle broke down, he abandoned it and got another ride. All well and good. If indeed the objective was the popularity, along with the ride. And now that I'm seeing the whole picture, I don't see this Mango Jones character doing it for the love of Black people. But it still speaks to the condition of the Crucian consciousness that this white man could pull it off in broad daylight. And yet we embrace him and send him to Washington to represent us and speak on our behalf. But the cold blooded reality was that just as the losers would have seen him as the greatest, the winners would have embraced him as the biggest prize.
The post of Washington representative period. It was a position that was specifically created for him, obviously as part of the deal. And that's how he was able to make the switch to national politics. Then, when the US Congress gave us the vote for governor, the office of Washington representative became delegate to Congress on a par with the District of Columbia.
That man made out like a fat rat and even got his name on the federal building in St. Thomas.
While Randelugo was securing his popularity as our white man in residence in the nation's capital, Earl Ackley was quietly but most effectively doing what he did best. He most explicitly stated his aim was to make the Donkeycrats a permanent minority. Using the power of reapportionment, he reduced the structure of the lawmaking body to the simplicity of a single cell bacterium. The 14 district senators and one at large configuration was his crowning achievement. No checks, and certainly no balance to the simple structure. With one legislative bill, Attlee accomplished his goal of creating a permanent minority. He called that minority the Donkeycrats, but I'm sure to St. Christ, and not simply because we were the home of the so-called Donkeycrat, but most assuredly to perpetuate our minority status on the territorial level. Only Pywanski had a greater role in creating the dysfunctional social unit we have today. But without a doubt, it was Attlee who cemented the political maze that keeps us electing St. Christ representatives at odds with each other.
I must be missing something. You're not saying anything about the difference in size. Yet there was a significant difference there. You said from early on that he thought the four at large were a constraint on their power. So wouldn't it be expected that he would want to reduce that number? I'm more surprised that he didn't completely eliminate them. What's so critical about those at large positions?
When you're talking about check and balance in a deliberative body, the key isn't size, it's structure. Structure trumps size every time. It's the structure of the body that creates the checks and balance. The essence of the government of a republic like the United States is the structure. Three separate but co equal branches checking and balancing each other. That is the system we know as a Republican form of government. The problem is legislative branch. This is accomplished by creating a two-chambered lawmaking branch to reconcile its power, as in the US, where the House of Representatives and the Senate check and balance each other to reach consensus. How then do you create a check and balance legislature in a small government with only 15 lawmakers?
Branch that in turn produces the structure of the body politic.
If our government is an American style republic, the answer is a resounding yes. As I tried to point out, when we were discussing the revised Organic Act, the US Congress gave us an 11-member legislature that was checked and balanced with seven district senators and four at large.
But wasn't that the very thing that so troubled politicians like
On the head again. The more structured the body, the more structure it generates in the political community. Ackley was in search of the opposite. Our politicians prefer an absolute minimum of structure to operate in. The only structure they seem to like is the one created by their powers of persuasion. Much like a schoolyard bully, a checked and balanced structure cramps their style. And when the only structure to the body politic becomes the persuasive powers of politician, you get what we have.
we're not that bad, are we?
What political structure elections?
What do you mean? Don't we have political parties?
We do. How do you define political party? For the last dozen years now, Democrats have been the ones winning elections after elections. Yet, time and again, it makes little or no difference at all as to who would control the body. How do you explain that?
Now you're asking me a question I ask all the time. I don't understand that. 10 of the 15 senators could be Democrats, but the legislative majority ends up being a coalition with some Democrats actually left in the minority.
It doesn't work. That's my point. The body has been reduced to its lowest, most simple structure. That's what I meant by a bacterium, a single cell, the lowest life form. I mean that our lawmaking body is the equivalent of that lowest life form and therefore easiest to manipulate by politicians.
Mm. I think I'm starting to grasp the concept. Aren't you saying that the body itself is supposed to be like some kind of clearinghouse that reconciles the personal interests of the legislature with the institutional interests of the legislature?
Exactly. Now you're getting the picture for true. Those checks and balances cause lawmakers to organize in order to effectively move legislation, which of course makes it more difficult for the individual or special interest to prevail. And in turn, it causes factions or parties to organize around issues as opposed to personalities.
Hmm. Wow, for a minute there, I thought I was back in the day listening to my basketball coach talk about team sports. Isn't that what you're saying? That a checked and balanced legislative branch is essential to the American Republic, and that this structure demands a team effort to successfully negotiate.
You're a fast learner. All right, you understand the concept. So now you should be able to grasp why the 7th district and 4 at-large senators were a problem. The US Congress created the closest thing to a two-chambered legislature, a body with only 11 members, with the 7 and 4 split. The check and balance was created, or at least the foundation of it. Congress wrongfully hoped that we would apply the finishing touches by giving the at large positions the power necessary to create an effective counterbalance to the district senators. But our politicians were intent on removing the check and balance as a hindrance to their bullying in the schoolyard. So they set out to thwart the very purpose of the structure. You compared it to a team sport. While I wouldn't call it a sport, it certainly has many of the characteristics of game. A game designed by the American Republic that forces the body politic to organize in teams, political teams, organized on the basis of their ideas and programs. If our politicians had understood the Republican function, strengthened the at-large senators so they could check and balance the district senators, that would have completed the structure of the game to force team play on the politicians. But as we have seen, our politicians had other things on their consciousness.
You wouldn't believe how clearly I'm seeing the picture. My coach used to call it promoting stars and losing games. But now I see that it translates perfectly to the personality politics. Or programs get promoted, but many are the personalities that rise for their time on stage. The goal of our kind of politics is the personality rather than the idea. So that as long as our star turned in another outstanding performance, it doesn't matter that we lost the game. The concept of team play has become such a mockery that the second largest block of registered voters is no party. Those unaffiliated with Democrats, Republicans, or I say independents. CMs.
The response here.
Tell me about it.
That sports metaphor is one I've never thought of. Please don't let me stop you.
Well, what I'm seeing is that when the 54th Act brought on the 7-4 split, it strengthened the territory's political organizations into teams. St. Croix and St. John on the Democratic team, while St. Thomas
Oh, yes.
coalesced around the Unity Party as their team. But after 4 elections, the Otley team realized how effective they were against the star power of the unorganized Prussians. So they were able to use their team play to such advantage that they could overcome the hindrance of checks and balances as if they never existed. They then used the power of their majority to change the rules of the game. How I come in?
Like a mother's child. But let me ask you this question. How did the Unity Party reach such a risky decision that they were better organized and able to dominate?
Because, as you explained, they made effective inroads on St. Croix with popular local personalities, beginning with Doc James, on St. Croix to arrive at the numbers he would need from St. Thomas to be victorious. Like you were careful to point out, even though the population was mushrooming, the black immigrants were excluded. So the voting lists were relatively small and manageable without computers. If the leadership had the commitment and capability, and we know those weren't qualities the Crucian leadership possessed. Consideration, it wasn't a risky proposition at all. The numbers don't lie. Once they saw they had the numbers, it was more a matter of being meticulous and paying attention to the details on election day.
Very good. So how did St. Thomian's politicians maintain their control over us?
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Isn't that what they say? They had no reason to change a successful strategy. The combination of popular personalities and superior organization had given them their foothold. All they needed was time. And as we've seen today, they're the dominant political force on this island. They're not the only show in town like on St. Thomas, but that was never the objective. The 1962 elections had already demonstrated that a foothold on St. Croix was all that St. Thomas needed. With control of their own constituencies securely in hand, they only needed to split the what they've managed to do ever since. And that's the heart of the domination right there. By choosing popular Crucian personalities, an illusion of homegrown representation is created. We embrace them as our own without realizing they're controlled by the party's seat of power in St. Thomas. Yet, every election result indicates how we vote according to plan. Of the 7 district senators we're allowed, we generally split our results with them. Not always, but we do. But you can count on a split. A typical result would be 3 Democratic winners, 2 ICMers, an independent and a Republican, or maybe just 2 independents. The point is that the unity controlled Democratic Party caused a split on this island and maintained political control over the newly created St. Thomas and John district. And it's not that this happens by accident. You've coherently demonstrated how it was designed and orchestrated. Every election result since 1960 proves your theory. Our consciousness has been turned against us.
And it all grows out of that perverse root that was the Santonian politicians' greed for power. By removing the checks and balances from the legislature, they turned your game into an all-star contest where fans and spectators come to see the stars and personality perform. What's so painfully obvious is the dire lack of vision on the part of these powerful African descendants. They can't seem to see any further than they need to be in control. And at this juncture, we have to confront the condition of consciousness, coverted domination of their colleagues. The economy was left entirely in the hands of Pywanski and his cabal. The scenario could be compared to the pompous black man driving the vehicle while the white man sits in the rear in obscure luxury.
Painful for true. If only those politicians could have just had the consciousness of David Hamilton Jackson. They had so much power. But what did they do with it? To secure more power over their brothers and sisters while allowing themselves to be manipulated like puppets on a string. Lord, what has America done to our consciousness? And here I was thinking the 60s gave us our mental emancipation.
as supple and effective as as it has been, I can't say you haven't been aware of it. Maybe we don't want to understand it, but we certainly feel it. And they tell me that who feels it knows it. How often have you heard of proposals like numbered seats and sub-districting?
I see where you're going. We're reacting to symptoms again, thinking the symptom to be the cause. But it doesn't really matter. If we adopt either one of or both, the cause and until the legislature is given a structure that provides check and balance, isn't the point that politicians on monolithic St. Thomas will prevail time and again?
The combination of a divided St. Croix and that simpleton bacterium-like structure to the legislative branch of an American-style republic produces the most favorable climate for St. Thomas to dominate. We're accused of turning against us when they get to the Capitol building. It never occurs to us that it's at this point that our brand new representatives first realizes who's in charge. Only then do the new members of the body fully appreciate without understanding what it's like to function in an unchecked, unbalanced lawmaking body. This is when the new senator is confronted with the insignificance of party labels. Unfortunately, more than 4 decades later, not one crucial politician has pointed to reapportionment as being problematic.
That is an amazing fact all by itself. The logical progression from a 7-4 split should have been a 9-6 split for the 15-member body. Even if they didn't understand how the American Republic worked, a reasonable mind would have questioned why such a radical change from 7-4 to 14-1. That certainly would have gotten my attention. And I hope you remember the legislature would have been right there in their faces demanding an explanation for making St. Thomas and St. John one district. How how are you going to just merge the population of one island with another? Should they have merged the state of Rhode Island with Massachusetts or Connecticut because it's such a small size? Of course not. Every state, like every island, has characteristics and aspirations peculiar to its identity. The only reason there could have been for merging St. John would have been the politics of neutralizing their opposition. Didn't you say that it was like a historical thing for St. John to side with St. Croix? There was your reason. Merge them with St. Thomas and dilute their votes. Then give them an at large seat they obviously couldn't control. I'm sorry. I just don't see how Crucian politicians could have missed what was so glaringly in their face. Maybe it was the reality of their being so outnumbered in the Senate after Victory 66 that they just surrender.
Who knows how much of a factor the psychological impact might have represented at the time. But what has since prevented the opposition from making it the issue it should be? As you said, just the major shift from a 7-4 structure to the 14 to 1 bacterium of a structure should still be raising eyebrows. Yet, we hear of numbered seats and sub-districting without a mention of the total absence of checks and balances.
You're making is that a legislature with checks and balances would promote the development in the larger political community.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The 14-member body should be split into 9 district senators and 6 at-large, but it must be structured so these 6 are able to check and balance the larger number of 9. This can be accomplished by giving the at-large senators 6-year terms, 6-year terms, with 2 of them standing for election every 2 years. Then the rules can be changed to require a certain number of at-large votes to pass legislation or override a veto. The more at-large votes, the more power the 6 get to counterbalance the 9. Certain positions, like the chair of the Rules of Finance Committee, might be set aside for at-large senators only. The objective is to always create checks and balances in the body by using district and at-large senators to reconcile whatever personal or special interest a lawmaker might entertain. And most importantly, you so effectively illustrated, the more checks and balance the legislature becomes, the more pressure it puts on lawmakers to play team sport. It promotes the development of political parties, and most critically, it promotes party development around issues. The personalities will dim in their importance as it becomes crystal clear that it requires organization to move legislation through the body successfully. It is this dynamic that creates that no that it is this dynamic that causes rallying for or against a particular issue. As is evidence across American political landscape, the result is whole communities becoming deliberative bodies for or against. Their bipartisanship reaching to the very marrow of society. It is on this platform that political parties reach consensus on issues they hope to move to ratification. Political factions are therefore forced to take sides and support their issues in an organized manner if they are to stand any chance of success. Political parties will coalesce around issues rather than personalities because it would have become the only road to success.
Aren't you telling me we're doomed to this personality politics unless we check and balance the legislature itself? Could I therefore consider Utley's accomplishments as a counter revolution? Considering all his political and labor union skills, he was really reactionary. I see what you meant when you referred to their lack of vision as powerful politicians. After his 1966 triumph, he was the master of all he survived. He surveyed. Yet, as you explained, the man's focus was on making St. Croix a permanent minority. If that isn't the arrogance of ignorance to cut off your nose to spite your face, then I don't know. Why hamstring the largest island of your territory? That makes as much sense as reducing the lowest common denominator. I'm not the least bit impressed. I'll keep David Hamilton Jackson. The Senate president and labor leader might have been brilliant at organizing and leading men, but visionary he was not. What I'm learning tells me his consciousness was as enslaved as his fellow politicians. Once I submit to his superior skills, I find myself at a loss. What's his legacy as a Virgin Islands political leader? Crucial politicians until he was able to dominate them and virtually put control of this island in the hands of St. Thomas politicians? Help me out here. Tell me something I'm missing.
Mhm. No question about it. He controlled the politics of the 60s and used his power unwisely. But then we always have to account for the man above him. Realistically, he wouldn't propose anything he knew Iwanski wouldn't approve of. Remember, this was the white man who caused their entire party to change its political clothing to align with him. So while Attlee was out front as the theoret- theoretician and chief organizer of the political troops, he answered to a commander in chief. But to answer your question directly, official historians gave him credit for transforming the Virgin Islands into a middle class society.
Now that you mention it, I remember hearing something sounding like that before, but my conscience probably blocked it from coming forward after I gained more context to the man. So, how could this self centered, power driven politician have elevated the status of our society so markedly?
They reached that conclusion by focusing on housing, a particular critical need for us as we merge from our agrarian settling into the government bureaucracy. Federal funds financed American inspired housing project. Not that Paiwansky saw the project as a bad choice for our people, but rather as an opportunity for his people. We borrowed money from the government. We borrowed money from the government employees retirement system. He had his people building housing for our people at Cyan Farm, then Monbiju. The island's housing situation improved dramatically. So would the finances of the cabal. As with the takeover of the economy, all major construction work was reserved for white corporations, while the labor force was virtually all black Caribbean immigrants.
So, how did Oddly end up getting credit for all of that?
More than any other, the issue of housing is responsible for the narrative of the 60s. As you're keenly observing, our economy came under the control of Paiwansky and his cabal. It was as if the governor made housing in exchange for the lion's share of our economy. Just listen to contemporary Democrats as they boast about creating Cyan Farm and Monbiju housing communities. Sure, the legislature approved them all, but they were Paiwansky initiatives to primarily make tons of money for him and his cabal. Yet, without the slightest notice of the close ties between the administration and builders, the developments were hailed as triumph for the politicians. A clearer line on this could not be drawn. And the frame of Earl Ackley necessarily pales next to the fortune of Ralph Paiwansky.
And us poor Clusians continue to struggle in the turbulent wake of the power of St. Thomas. So we credit the Otley faction, which is now the Democratic Party, with giving us the home ownership program. It's never even mentioned that we paid to join the middle class. A careless listener could easily get the impression the homes were free of mortgages. The Democrats simply gave them to their supporters. That's another amazing thing. As best as I could tell, no one seems to connect Pywanski to money. He's portrayed as this benevolent white father that facilitated Otley proposed. You could make a you could make a dung heap out of the misrepresentations, half truths, and outright ties they pass on to us as our inheritance. It should be a crime.
But there was this one thing he relished having his name associated with, and that was the College of the Virgin Islands, now the university. He considered it his timeless gift to the well deserving people of the Virgin Islands. Did you know the governor was a scientist? Yeah, a chemist. One of his most successful business ventures was as a rum distillery. I don't think you could call him a brewmaster, but his hot rum made him a decent return. My question, why a scientist with every available option would choose to establish a liberal arts institution for a population of African descendants?
You know, this is something I can use your help with. Like I told you, I did take some courses at UVI, but so help me God, I still don't understand the terminology. What's with the liberal arts thing?
It's only confusing because it's never been explained to you. Europeans had a way of categorizing everything by what they considered your station in life. A liberal education was best suited for gentlemen. Ladies simply didn't need education, they needed a husband. And a well bred gentleman was to be exposed to language, literature, history, and fine arts. This was an education in the liberal arts. Apart from this, there were the natural sciences, not quite suited for a gentleman, but most appropriate for the ambitious commoner.
You can't be serious. That's what a liberal arts education was. So what? Even the chemistry Governor Pywanski studied was below those blue blood people? Thank God Pywanski want us to have a liberal education.
Think about what I have said. Language, literature, and fine art were the core subjects in the curriculum. What do those represent to you?
I don't think I'm following you.
Institutions of higher learning are what we call colleges and universities, and they divide their courses of study into two main categories: humanities and science.
Why didn't you say that at the beginning? I'm only now realizing that liberal arts and humanities are the same thing. Now I follow the point you were making as to why a scientist would promote a liberal education. And I too would want to hear the answer to that question, unless I'm still lost. What I understand to be the humanities are the very branches of study that are not natural sciences. So why didn't the scientist governor want the students of the Virgin Islands exposed to science?
You know, it's only now I remember you saying you asked the question because you had trouble with the terminology. It must be my age. Please excuse me. But now that we're on the same page, understanding that a liberal arts education is simply an education in the humanities Let me continue. A natural universal truth that is consistently proven anywhere at any time. The humanities, on the other hand, represents the culture and civilization of a people or race. And that could only mean that when we study the liberal arts, also known as humanities, we're in fact studying the culture of somebody somewhere.
That's right. And I have to admit, I never looked at it that way before. Whichever humanities course we study, it's somebody else's culture we're studying. Whether it's literature, history, philosophy, sociology, or some fine arts. Then your question to be is, why did the governor want us studying someone else's culture rather than science?
Precisely my point. The humanities we're exposed to are not of Asian, Middle Eastern, or African culture. They are strictly of European origin. So let me rephrase the question this way. Why did Paiwansky, who studied science, select a study of European?
I think you're on target by exposing me to the meaning of some of these terms we use so casually without registering on their significance. It is, in fact, European and American culture we're studying when we take any humanities courses at UVI, not Asian, Middle Eastern, or African, as you pointed out. The humanities we get are exclusively of white people, European, and American. So I now answer your question by saying that Governor Paiwansky thought it more important to teach Black students how to be white than to be scientists.
You think that had anything to do with why he was so proud of his accomplishments? I just found it rather peculiar how he would modestly yield publicly to Earl Ackley on just about anything else. The College of the Virgin Islands was his baby. He contrast in the governor's behavior that piqued my curiosity. So now that you follow, I ask you, why would a scientist choose a liberal arts institution for a people with our background and history?
Personally, I think you enjoy setting the table for me and then stepping back to see what I do. But I don't mind, not timid about expressing yourself. So let me tell you what I think about Governor Paiwansky. Two things. One, that the man knew what he wanted. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that he had been plotting for some time. The Cuban revolutionaries were in control on New Year's Day of 1959. Paiwansky took over in April of 1961. Like you, I don't accept coincidences. That man Mali with its inviting harbor and set out to exploit it. My view is that he, in fact, planned to take control of liquor and cigarettes and have an even more lucrative tourist business than Havana. And secondly, it strikes me that this was a white man experience in relating to blacks. He wasn't the carpetbagger type. He obviously knew how to keep the Centomian politicians happy and coming back for more. That's a brief sketch of the man from Cuba. But I'll add this. He played us as well as a musician plays his instruments.
So, the whole College of the Virgin Islands initiative was just part of the scheme to control and use us.
Of course. Didn't you cause me to see that? As I thought about what you said, it came to me that so many of the historically black institutions in the deep south of America were agriculturally and mechanically inclined. From 1A and M college was legal. That certainly speaks to the realization that coming from the deprived depths of slavery, The last thing Black people would be needing was the liberal education of white gentlemen. Pywanski demonstrated a clear understanding of the Black experience until it came to education. Didn't he put our local teachers out of the system and replace them with Americans? No, he doesn't fool me. He knew exactly what he was doing.
You're right. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was all to get there. The man took over the Virgin Islands like it was a company town, and he was the company. Maybe you might prefer the analogy of a plantation where we all worked for him and had to purchase our necessities from him too. But the facts remain that in a small territory with millions of visitors yearly, most of them buying liquor and cigarettes with a purpose in the 60s and 70s. Pywanski and his cabal were responsible for selling every bottle of liquor and every pack of cigarettes. You just can't imagine the wealth they were accumulating.
In my soul the first time he said it. It's just so hard to accept that this still goes on, even if the white faces have changed. Isn't this more of our consciousness accepting that's the way it's supposed to be?
Don't forget the major role the same man played in dictating the formal upbringing we would get. And since we've agreed it won't be a coincidence, that could only mean he purposefully set out to teach us Americanism. From kindergarten to college. You've been a great example of the result of his approach. Haven't you convincingly stated the information you heard today as new to you? And it's not like we've been talking about much other than this island. We haven't really touched St. Thomas or St. John. We've been talking almost exclusively about this island. Yet you, the high school honor graduate, barely know your own history.
I know. Only today was I able to get a solid grasp of the problem. Even though the school system is failing before our eyes as more and more of our students drop out, we continue to find excuses.
Even today, too many Crucians attribute the problem with naturalized citizens. A definite step in the right direction forced on us by the reality of ever larger numbers being naturalized. But as we discussed earlier, the children of bonded workers were not accepted in all public schools. So, when the federal court ordered all children legally resident on the island admitted to our schools, a crisis was on hand. Public schools were already crowded. Where to put the thousands of children now eligible to enter the classroom? Split sessions were hurriedly scheduled with one group in the morning and a different group in the afternoons for what was called double sessions. Faculty and staff were stretched to the limit, and both groups of students receiving less of the school experience. A crash program of school construction finally caught up with the increased enrollment, but Crucians blamed immigrants for mashing up the school system.
That's so lame. It's transparent. It's a consciousness they fashioned for us that seeks out the least fortunate among us to trample on. Black children are as desperately in need of education as our children. To deprive them of schooling should have been considered a crime against humanity. It's revolting that more than a century after General Bodo and Admiral Martin King, we African descendants could even allow that to happen.
I wasn't there for it, But when the federal authorities conducted that so called alien roundup, every report I'm familiar with was disturbingly reminiscent of the inhumane treatment of earlier times. I suppose it was the official end of the phenomenal growth of the 60s. Construction had tapered off, and the system concluded there were too many immigrants. Therefore, they called the numbers, removing close to 7,000 black as undesirable or illegal. Everybody had to notice the economic impact as stores and banks closed their doors. But nothing was said. The likes of Barker's, department store, or Bank of America was a small price to pay to get rid of them, as we would have phased it back then, as we have phrased it back then, and and with the passing immigrants, now naturalized US citizens have actually become more patriotically American than most native born Crucians.
I know exactly what you mean by that. I've got this St. Lucian lady on my job who's naturalized. Miss Son, you don't want to say anything even mildly critical of the states when she's around. And don't get to think it's because she's so informed and knowledgeable. The woman, in her own maternally insistent way, will try shame and embarrass you for your ungratefulness for all America has done for us. What's embarrassing is the totally ignorant utterances this woman will fling as at you with such authority in her voice.
And slavery is a condition we all share as an African descendant. It infuriates the friction between us on this island. It's the main reason why our social problems with the so called alien have been much more challenging than with Puerto Rico.
You know, that's so true. How this race issue plays out in our consciousness is so much more complex and nuanced than most of us realize. I was reflecting on the difference between foreign workers under the Danes as compared to the Americans. As best as I can recall, you didn't speak about any friction between them and our ancestors. Not even the coolies from India generated the kind of strife we experience with our Caribbean neighbors. Whether Bajans, Antiguans, or Filipinos, we managed to get along under the Danes only to have such resentment and dislike for the same people when we became Americans. They rebelled and died side by side with us during the fire bond. These were the same Caribbean brothers and sisters who would have helped to make St. Croix Labor Union a reality. What happened? The only objective change I can find was the flag. That is, until World War II, when the Americanism, as you called it, took hold of us as the foreign workers were being reintroduced as aliens.
Just as we had started to make some progress, American Manifest Destiny stepped in to support us. That solidarity they witnessed when they took over was not going to be tolerated.
So you're telling me the Americans, specifically the Navy governors, I would suppose, were reacting to what they found when they arrived.
Think about it. What did they find? Black people on a Caribbean island with their own labor union and a productive dairy farm. Maybe you didn't know, but the mostly Southern naval officers posted on this island couldn't be considered race neutral. In their minds, white supremacy was an integral part of the mission. Accordingly, the importation of African descendants from the Caribbean islands had to be stopped. Substituted were Puerto Ricans who had a language problem to keep them apart, not to mention the difference in ethnicity. that was too obvious to hide, and local union. So you see, from the onset, from the outset, American rule meant discord among the laboring masses.
I was focusing on the sharp contrast between Caribbean immigrants since World War II as compared to before the Americans took over. The major difference can't be missed by anyone making the most superficial and cursory review of our history. Either we're that ignorant of our history or our consciousness is that perverted. But as I must admit, I screwed up the foreign workers ban as a prelude to the Puerto Ricans. That's really where the Americans showed their heavy hand. The obvious and only reason because the Union. And now that you've refocused my attention, I can unequivocally state that this was but the beginning of the American modus operandi of dividing the masses against themselves.
My rationale is explicit. No way am I going to allow us to omit the role of America in creating the climate that brought about our dysfunctional society. Must bear the responsibility for its actions. We are a territory of African descendants who cannot see eye to eye. As a matter of fact, there are very few things, if any, that the overwhelming black majority can agree on. My point is that out of the ignorance, we have attributed our dislike for each other to what we consider an innate hatred black people have for each other. And as you now know, we're an enmity and hatred for each other before the Americans arrived. The same people the Americans told us were aliens had stood shoulder to shoulder with us through some of our toughest times. But simply by concealing our inspiring history, America and her minions have imposed a structure on us that does little more than promote strife between the black people on this island.
I could just imagine what my coworker would have to say if she heard your description of America's benevolent rule.
And she would indeed be our proof of the pudding. Having next to no knowledge of our history, that poor lady can only rely on the misinformation her consciousness has collected. If she had to be exposed to some of the information you are now aware of, would her reaction be to accept or deny it in defense of America?
My bet would be malicious by willfully spreading lies about America. I really don't know what it would take to persuade a consciousness like hers. Because I swear, I don't see that woman doing anything other than doing her standard reaction.
I agree with you. I don't see the person you describe responding any other way. It could even be called typical or uninformed African descendants. There is any number of Crucians who can, who there's any who feel the same way. She does. More like a majority of us on this island who harbor very similar sentiments.
Coming from you, that's a pretty bold statement. What makes you so disposed to commit to something as unverifiable as that?
Simple. Isn't a common thing to hear that we are what we eat? Well, I maintain we are our consciousness. If the information isn't there, we can't retrieve it. We're talking about uninformed black people, not conscious African descendants. So ask yourself, what does the majority of us know about ourselves and our situation? Our people can't see how we could survive without America. And that literally means we seriously question if we could survive without white people.
Whoa, aren't you going further out on a limb? Do you really think our people feel that way?
We don't just feel it, we see it. Our daily sustenance depends on white people. Whether it has to be that way is another question. But as we live today, tourists and the federal government represents the economy we live by. Not only can everyone see that politicians repeat it as they remind us of their latest effort to enhance our quality of life. The average man on the street has to conclude that it's our relationship with America that keeps us afloat. While Prussians and naturalized citizens disagree on just about everything, we will all be quick to agree we wouldn't be without white people. And that's the bottom line of our mentally enslaved consciousness. We think ourselves inferior to white people.
You did it to me again. I'll confess I never saw that coming, but you're so right. Our misleaders have facilitated our powerful strides that were made before their time. As you keep saying, all we know is what we've been exposed to. And the past half century doesn't offer the experiences that would give our people self esteem and confidence in themselves.
Your generation and even the one before yours would have searched to find positive information. The average African descent almost forced to accept inferiority in their consciousness. Our upbringing, as well as our circumstances, are constantly indicating that our standard of living comes from white people, and we know next to nothing about ourselves. The system which we all acknowledge is white is responsible for what we do know of ourselves.
I remember reading that in one of your books. Know thyself, you said, was the command of our ancestors. But from all appearances, I'll have to say we're still not heeding.
Let me share a really interesting story with you. It's about here, Black people's here.
Been at my hair several times, but I'll warn you ahead of time that I'm not ready to wear my hair in locks. When I'm ready, I'll let you know. I should have known you'd get around to how I look. Is my skirt too short? Too tight? I don't know if I'm ready for this conversation.
It's not about you at all. It's a personal story. As a matter of fact, you'll be the first person I ever shared it with. It's about my late mother and my hair.
Oh, well, that's a story I want to hear.
Let me point out that this is something had stopped combing my hair. I was only, it was only when I told her yes that I realized she was being sarcastic. Since the natural look had come into fashion, I wore my hair as long as I could get it to grow. And as you might imagine, there were days and times of days when my afro could have looked unpicked. I was using a pick nappy hair had outgrown the biggest teeth comb. So, with the most serious face, she asked me if I was going to be a Rasta. I reminded her how religion and I didn't get along too well, but that I was going to let my hair grow into locks. You would have thought I'd struck my dear mother. We ended up in a very serious conversation about hair. The more I tried to convince her the harder she pressed to instill that our kind of hair doesn't grow so long. She explained how often she used to she had to go to the hairdresser, or her hair would turn back because it wasn't naturally that long. She said that it had to be straightened to get as long as it was.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you said something I need to have clarified. Are locks like yours natural? I mean, didn't you have to do something to get your hair like that? I've heard all kinds of different things you all use. What did you use?
You're as bad as my mother was. Just listen and allow me to tell the story. It might answer your question. Like you was set in her belief of the myth that our hair can't grow long. She believed that an inch or so was long as it would grow without straightening. She even lectured me on the limitations of our hair. That good hair would grow unless that good hair would grow unless you cut it. But bad hair like ours didn't grow. It just got tangled. She confided in me that in her younger days, she had actually tried to grow her hair longer and that it was her mother who explained her issue. She said that in her days, the girls would cut into their hair. The longer your braid, the better your hair. And this was to convince me that only good hair grows naturally. Bad hair like ours can grow to any length naturally.
Okay,
Naturally, right there.
thank you. Okay.
You find it? 270.
Okay, I had become fully relaxed in your company, and now look at me, a tight ball of tension. What's the matter with you? I've been black all my life. Me, a black woman, you're telling about here. What is it you're trying to provoke out of me now?
Seriously, I'm not trying to upset you. I'm sharing something with you I've never even thought of talking about. But when you brought back the command of good and bad,
All well and good, but it doesn't justify your comparison of good and bad here. Been there, done that. And I would be the first to agree that the use of good and bad to describe here is misplaced and racist. But how does that change the reality? Our hair isn't straight, and there's nothing newsworthy about the fact that the straighter your hair, the longer it grows. Not even try to tell a black woman your hair grew like that without you doing something to it. You might call it natural because you don't use store bought chemicals like my hairdresser does. Whether it comes kind of cactus concoction or maybe aloes, it comes down to the same thing. You all just found a more natural way to get the same result. And that's the point your mother was making. Our kind of hair doesn't naturally grow long. It might not be bad hair, but it's different to white people's straight hair.
different but not inferior. Our hair can grow as long as the straightest hair.
Your mother should have forced your hand with that nonsense. She should have just made you tell her what you put in your hair.
But she did. It was really a big thing between us for the longest time. That first encounter didn't settle anything. It only marked the positions that mother and son would elaborate on over the next few years. But don't get to thinking it was some kind of running battle. She wasn't that kind of person or mother. Our discussions only took place when we were alone. Many a time during this period, others would be in our company and she wouldn't give the slightest hint we had an ongoing debate about hair. Once, after I started covering my hair when I visited, she asked me if I wasn't afraid Santa bees would get in my hair. After a good laugh, I asked her, why would they get in my hair and not hers? She said because she kept hers clean and I didn't wash my hair anymore. I was floored. I couldn't imagine why my mother would think I would stop washing my hair. Anyhow, I puzzled. So thinking she was surprised my hair was clean. I asked if it was clean enough, but she responded by asking me if I didn't have anything in my hair. And when I told her I didn't, my mother was as flustered as I had ever seen her. She wanted to know if I washed my hair as regularly as before, but then she still wanted to ask if I really didn't use anything. Now she knew I didn't like to grease my hair. I am one of those people with an oily scalp. So she knew it was a rare thing for me to put anything in my hair. Then it hit me. My hair was growing ever longer, and she wanted to know why. I did my best to explain that while our hair was nappy and kinky, it was also thick and strong. And as a result, the longer it gets, the more tangled it gets as it naturally kinks into locks, with its nappy neighbors growing like vines in search of support. Every time we pass a comb through it, every time we pass a comb through our growing kinky hair, we break off those vines like tips, reaching for their neighbors. After using a comb in nappy hair, take a close look at that comb and you will find the evidence. When you conk or straighten yours, it just takes more growth for the tips to get caught in the comb. But the end result is still the same with hairs like ours. Unless you're going to straighten it every day, it won't be but so long before a comb will break it. Our hair is meant to be groomed and dressed as differently from straight hair as it looks. Whether natural or straightened, a comb will cause our hair to break. There's no disputing that. Like most everything else, no, like most everything else, we just assume we should be following the lead of white people. As obviously different as our hair is, but I could tell I had struck a chord on I had struck a chord and had her thinking about what I said. But it wasn't until the following year, when the length of my hair had reached the middle of my back, that things came to a head. Was I still not using anything on my hair? She wanted to know. When I answered that I still only washed it and couldn't tell her the last time I even greased it, then she had me sit on the bed next to her, as if I was her little boy all over again, with braids like she'd never seen them before. Then she told me she was about to go to her grave convinced our hair couldn't grow. She said if she hadn't seen it for herself, she wouldn't have believed it. But she saw that it was indeed my hair had grown, literally in front of her eyes without the aid of absolutely anything. Later on, I showed her pictures of ancient Egyptians with locks, and she laughed as hard too when she really felt it. What, what, what What's the matter?
Would you mind if I touched your hair?
No, not at all. Here, take a look. Check for yourself.
But but it really is your hair. I'm almost confused with excitement. I don't know what I expected earlier, but just as I thought you were looking at my hair, I found myself trying not to look at yours. Now I think I can understand why your mother like laughing too, laughing heartedly at how silly and stupid I feel looking at hair that could very well be my own and not recognizing it. And guess what? I've noticed those ancient Egyptians too. And dizzy me, I can even remember thinking how the hair looked so much like it was in locks. Know thyself. I was so impressed when I read those words, only to now recognize that I didn't fully understand them. My God, I can't believe I really didn't know my own hair. It's true. You describe our hair perfectly. It's really growing, twisting, curling until it kinks with another. And I was dead to anything that kinked up. Lord have mercy on me. I now have to go home and face my son. How could I not have seen what was right in front of my face all my life?
This might be a good time for us to summarize what we consider to be crucial consciousness.
I'll listen. I feel entirely too humble to do more than learn. That's much. That much I've come to understand today that I have gained from realizing of how little I really know.
Don't feel no way about it. Let me tell you, I had to travel that road. Almost every bend brings the unexpected that could be motivating, humbling, and downright discouraging. In a nutshell, our challenge is to come to grips with the fundamental reality that we don't know who we are. We want to be white, but we are not. And we absolutely refuse to be Africans. So, how are we to have any concept of the people descended from the African continent? The root of it is consciousness, a consciousness that's being saturated with self hate. Our collective conscience and our moral sense perceive us as incapable and unworthy. And that, in my biggest version, is the mountain called mental slavery that blocks our progress.
This whole discussion was about showing me how we came to be who we are and why our progress stopped with David Hamilton Jackson. But now that we're caught up in our black on black conflict, aren't we ready to
Just before that,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm listening. I just can't stop touching and admiring your hair, our kind of hair. What I really want to say is that I can't stop admiring your hair and how soft, long, and strong it really is. It's amazing. I can't get over it. Please go on. I'm not bothering you. Am I?
no, not at all. Knock yourself out. Just soak up and absorb what's fascinating you. Realize that you're admitting to seeing your own hair in a different light. Your own hair, the hair you've had on your head all your life. If it took you all your adult life to learn that your hair can grow as long as anyone else's, what does that say about your consciousness? It tells me that, like so many of us, you look at the effect, the symptom, so much so that it surprises you to learn that our hair grows differently. Never mind that our hair not only looks different, but that the naked eye could see that our hair is radically different from straight hair. Yet, it's surprising to learn that it grows differently. We are much too focused on the effect rather than the causes that produce them. Notice of the various structures the system imposes on our territory. But it is, but it, but it, the issue of politics, the social strife between us as blacks, or the spiraling lawlessness of our young people. We invariably push back against the consequences we suffer rather than the structure that is the actual cause of the problem. And you know that we've made the case of how the lives of the consequences we experience. You have seen how, with a handful of exceptions, Crucian have concentrated our effort on opposing the consequences. And we've talked about those exceptions. There was the General and the Admiral, Queen Mary, and of course David Hamilton Jackson. Other than those three, we would mention Earl Attlee. He didn't bring change for the altruistic reasons the Crucians had, but he must be credited with changing the structure that most definitely had consequences on St. Croix. This is the sum total of structural changes that can be attributed to our people. And as we've discussed, the political changes we've enacted to enable the St. Thomas Unity Party to dominate the politics of St. Croix. Yet, as we've made the consequences of the structure as if they were the cause of our political problems.
And by our political structure, you, of course, mean the reapportionment of the legislature that removed the checks and balances by giving us this two district 14 to 1 configuration that Crucians don't recognize as a major problem.
You got it. The structures and consequence equation of our body politic and the fixable as you can see it is we're reluctant to approach the structure. Then there's the revolting issue of the senseless antagonism between Crucians and Again, notice the severe consequences brought on by the illegal structure the US government imposed on our Caribbean brothers and sisters. It doesn't take a sociologist to evaluate the different status a Caribbean immigrant experienced under the Danes as compared to the Americans. It was obviously the American structure that caused the radical change between 1917 and World War One, as I'm sure of the transfer to America, people from all over the Caribbean were an integral part of the Crucian social fabric. They toiled, struggled, and died side by side with Crucians. An incredible contrast between then and now that screams how significant social structures are to the consequences of people's lives. It was the legal structure that prohibited Caribbean blacks, the Latinos, the Latinos of Puerto Rico. We saw it primarily as a tactical move against the Union, which it was, but the social impact of the influx of Spanish speaking laborers cannot be ignored. The differences between those two groups in the labor force would be negatively accentuated as planters and government alike kept the Puerto Ricans as unionized Crucians. But then notice how swiftly the federal government would make the necessary structural change when the war Americanized Crucians as well as Puerto Ricans. We'll finish.
I think I'm following your reasoning. When they realized the Puerto Ricans, who represented the bottom of the social structure, were moving up, they quickly found a better replacement. Meaning, as World War II, the 1954 Revised Organic Act brought Puerto Ricans into a measure of parity with Prussians, There was no one left at the bottom to despise. And not coincidentally, but most purposely. The structure was tweaked to create that new powerless class at the bottom they officially called aliens. And to tell you the truth, I still can't get that ugly image out of my head. Why would a country join a war to fight Nazi bigotry and Japanese imperialism at the same time introduce blacks into a black territory as aliens?
Maybe you're losing sight of the consequence of such a structure to our territory. And if you're thinking America went too far in Europe to save Jews, think again. Because that kind of thinking will have you accepting that Caribbean immigrant workers were accepted simply because their labor was needed. If that was the case, why were they locked out in the first place? Wasn't their labor needed when it was turned down in favor of the Puerto Ricans?
I'm aware of that. Was the Union and the eye opening progress it was making. And of course, the corollary benefit of dividing the workforce was a welcome thing. But why such a wicked arrangement or structure, as you would call it? There was no need for the bonding and sponsorship of those destitute and deprived people, from what I've been able to understand. That was as close to the equivalent of modern day slavery as I imagine we can get. What rights did a bonded worker have? None, as far as I can see. At any time, for any reason, the sponsor could terminate the bond and turn the worker over to immigration authorities. And if that worker can't get another sponsor, that's the end of it. He or she has to leave under penalty of arrest. What kind of life was that?
A very hard life, but again, you're attaching sensitivity to the system as if it is as long as you're productive and under control. If the purpose is to divide the labor force to better control it, would there be any complaints if the result is effective? Isn't that what you're really asking?
Maybe I was, but I can see why the system would have no complaints. As you pointed out, the structure was working just fine for their purposes. What has now grabbed my attention is the obvious. Why didn't our people, the Crucians, why didn't they put up a fight against such degrading exploitation of our brothers and sisters?
That's a great question. Every ideology seems to have a theory to explain the behavior. Some experts even attribute it to the competitive nature of man. As humans, we thrive on competition and rivalry and have a driving urge to be the winner in the face of the loser. I don't have that kind of expertise, but I have a lot of experience researching our history, written and oral. And I haven't forgotten that I lived this part of our history. This was the period when America was taking hold of our consciousness. I hope I was effective in trying to recapture the searing impact returning veterans had on the island. For us who hadn't experienced the States, they represented the big time kind of life we had only glimpsed in our weekly movie reels and the pages of the Ebony Magazine. And they, of course, fed off our gullible ignorance and embroidered their stories to match their swagger. We went into the 1960s desperately wanting to be as American as our illusions. And that is something I couldn't say about Crucians going all the way back to 1917. But to 1917, before the post-war period, the United States didn't have greatly aided by the structure I've highlighted. monkey see, monkey do. Remember? As we Americanize, we gain the right to be superior to other nationalities. And lo and behold, we were presented with an alien nationality without rights. Unless you lived it, you would never imagine the war propaganda that carried over into the 50s and the so-called Cold War. I say realize that it was a very American thing to be hearty and arrogant in the face of other nationalities, and intolerant and doctrinaire attitude against workers coming from the British Isles was almost expected.
But didn't we go to war with the British as allies?
If you had lived through it, you would have said that we went to war to help the British. But it makes the point. And that point is that we would view the immigrants as below us because they weren't American. Colorblind as we were making ourselves, it never occurred to us that the immigrants were our brothers and sisters. If we couldn't identify with the viciously oppressed blacks in America, how could we be expected to see Caribbean blacks as our kin? Emmett Till lynching made the news in the very magazines we anticipated weekly and monthly. It's a marvel of consciousness that we could survive the civil rights movement without the slightest hesitation to discriminate against the increasing number of Caribbean black migrating to the island. The reality of our history is that as the black struggle in America was gaining momentum, we were at the very same time hardening our prejudice against other blacks. Continue. You want to go to the end?
Okay, let's do it. But isn't it a natural thing to react to what's happening something far away? It just seems to me that at that time, Prussians wouldn't have had the upbringing to deal with their circumstance any other way.
Precisely, unless there was information in our consciousness to tell us otherwise, it could simply be interpreted as the difference between experiencing a fire somewhere against the reaction to a fire in your house. Our upbringing had already caused us to embrace the powerful and victorious United States as our ideal. We wanted to be that image of a colorless island in the Caribbean, choosing to rise to an exclusive level of America's tropical playground. Freeze frame is seen from that era, and you will find a Crucian people who were decidedly not African descendants, denied their blackness, and proudly proclaimed themselves to be red blooded Americans.
But it seems like it was such a short time before that when David Hamilton Jackson had us to do for ourselves.
And you would be right. It's the very point we're emphasizing. The Crucian consciousness had experienced a major shift by the 1960s.
Okay, I think I got it now. It would have been this new perspective we developed that accommodated our disdain for our brothers and sisters of a different nationality. All of a sudden, they weren't the same people we knew and worked with under the Danes. No, it was a whole new ball game now, and they were wearing different uniforms, belonging to a team we knew we could beat.
Of mind that allowed Iwanski and the Santonian politician to take control of us in the 60s, a decade that saw the island's population doubled as immigrants answered the call for labor to build Harvey and Hess. We entered the 17s busting at the seams. Strife was rampant, and we accused and blamed the black immigrants for every real or imagined problem. The so-called alien roundup might have removed the undocumented illegals as would have also been felt, or also been fault of the immigrants.
I think I'm getting a feel of the climate you're describing. The black immigrants were the bad guys, powerless as they were. Whatever went wrong, it was their fault, which makes me think of what it must have been like when the federal court ordered all children legally on the island admitted to public school, with banks and businesses closing and school on double sessions. Those poor people most likely were bearing the wrath of both the Crucians and the governments.
That's the end. Page
And then
276.
275.
Yeah, 275, and we'll resume from 276.
All right.
Yes, I.
Yeah.
All right, a whole different play.
Yes. So as we stretch a minute, let me
Yes.
just share again where you can obtain a copy of the Crucian Dialogues written by Mario C. Moorhead, which is one on Amazon. It's available hard copy or digitally. If you want a hard copy on the island of St. Croix, you can contact 340-277-7485. Again, 340-277-7485. Also, let me just share quickly that, another organization is sharing in the reading of Mario Moorhead's book, and that's the other chapter, and that takes place on Sundays at 5:30 p.m. at Dorf Center, Frederickstead. So I'll share the further details before we end tonight. So we stretched, and now it's reasoning time.
Very disappointing to see and that ignorance continues to this very day.
Hmm.
What was really striking to me was the fact surrounding the university, the development of the university, to create a liberal arts program out of anything else. This man could have created a vocational college. This man could have created a scientific college, you know, college, maybe a medical school or something of that nature, but chose and call it, College of the Virgin Islands, and chose liberal arts to be
Liberal
its
art.
primary, primary field of study.
Yeah. And he was a scientist.
You know, that a lot. Now, I'm gonna say this. If we are come to an understanding to recognize the European thinking and the framework of white supremacy, we must understand what white supremacy is. And I don't call it white supremacy, I call it white system of dominance and domination, because there's nothing superior about them. And the fact that they only subvert power by coercion, right? Coercion, right, is what makes them where they're at. We can give them the credit of being more malicious in their thinking, and more deliberate in the things that they do than us. So if you want to call that superiority, they could be superior in that way. But the thing that got me was that our people continually fall for this okey doke of inclusivity.
So, wow. Sticking to what you, so the reasoning that was more obvious as to why scientists, Governor Perwansky, um, promoted liberal arts was to get the black people to think white. So in that way, they no longer see themselves of being valued as a black person, and especially in the rebelled against um, oppression, white oppression, white domination, right? So in that way, it's like whitewash the minds of the black people so that they could be tamed and thrive to become white.
Right. Assimilated. That's assimilation. We got to the point where, even if you look in the States, it's the same thing in the South, where we have assimilated so much of the thinking, behaviors, patterns of, let's call them what they are, Caucasian people. We would go to the farthest length to try to protect these structures because we uphold these structures as our own, right? It's so funny because I was just reading something not too long ago, and it's so weird. Please, or something to the like of, when will white people, remove, I think they say the system where, it blocks black people, certain types of privileges. When will the system ease up and allow black people to have more privileges? And I had to say, listen, man, we're so brainwashed because we still don't get it that assimilation is not the way forward, right? We could never, ever be free in a system that is structured solely under perpetuation of violence, dominance, you know what I'm saying, of our people, a system that is totally set up on chattel slavery. We need to start thinking about separation, right? Separating ourselves totally from that framework of what is called the American dream and the American ideal. But most people don't get it. We still want to be black in a white system.
So, interesting, right? Because now thinking about David Hamilton Jackson and how he was compared with Earl the Artley Green compared with David Hamilton Jackson, as far as um, union leader, politician, um, I think, I'm not sure about the newspaper part.
Yeah, he had a newspaper too.
Was mentioned there.
Mhm.
Okay. So the difference with them was consciousness. Because someone may say, okay, well, David Hamilton Jackson went into the system that existed, right? To find ways to liberate his people.
Right.
So one would say that he have a conscious, right?
Right.
However, when you look at Otley, where was his mind in thinking? Was he thinking about truly self-determination, or was he thinking of I would be the best
We'll
whitewash
just power away from Crucians because of whatever hatred they had for Crucians.
right? And he was not of that
Mindset.
mindset
Right.
that David Hamilton Jackson
Well,
was.
we
So
can
the
look at it.
question is,
Yeah.
right? Given the consciousness of someone, mine, of course, irrespective of where they are, if they're in the system, if like you're a teacher, right? And you have a conscious mind, what would you do to help teach the students about themselves, give them value? There might be a teacher that would be like that, and then there might be another teacher, right, in the same education system, but be going strictly in terms of okay, European humanities is what we are only going to be focusing on, and we're not going to tell you, the students, who are in the Caribbean about your history. So given again, you have two teachers in the system, one have a conscious mind. It's like you know what? I will find a way to help these students know themselves.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's like you have something in existence already, but can you utilize it in the meantime to help waken those minds? Because the mind, as I'm observing, the mind
Needs a reset.
yes.
The mind need a reset.
And if we listen the mind,
The thing about it, the reset comes from rejecting everything. Rejecting everything and now moving on a basis of factual evidence that aligns itself with who you are as a person. Going back to the comparison between D. Hamilton Jackson and Attlee, we could look very much towards probably the upbringing, right? They probably apart by maybe 40 years, maybe, because I think at the time David Hamilton Jackson, from the time Attlee started to get into to the range of politics, right? So we got to talk about that possibly Eddie, what's his name?
earlier.
Yeah, Attlee was probably coming off of a generation of those who are veterans who made it back from World War II. So he might have been growing up in that new Americanism, right? Despite the fact that he became a labor union person, he came up with what was primary in his consciousness was Americanism, right? To really, you know what I'm saying? Also, there was maybe some level of a distaste because I know that in St. Thomas, there's a group of Tomian people that really don't care for St. Louis. In fact, they would look across the Tartola and see Tartola closer to them than they see St. Croix. By right, because by geography, Tartola is closer.
So let's dive into that era of time, right?
Right.
David Hamilton Jackson experience being under Danish rule. They were brothers and sisters from the various Caribbean coming on this island, right, to work, and they were part of the Senkoi Labor Union. So they were shoulder to shoulder in standing up for their rights.
Right.
So he experienced that, right, and then he also experienced when the United States came in
And took over the territory.
right. So he still kept that consciousness of saying, those are my brothers and during exactly the Danish
He was
time,
one of
and he
them
did
first
not.
generation of Americanized babies.
Right. So now with that mindset, and then of course, oh, that's not the time. With the mindset of now the quote unquote immigrants, right? When the United States came up with a structure now, right? And labeled the same brothers and sisters as aliens. Now it's like that generation of people who are under the US, right? Are with that mindset of dividing, dividing people who are not islands or are under this United States flag. So you have to, they're in a different class. So again, as agreed, I agree, is the mindset of the people when they come here now. It's like, hey, they're more quote unquote Americanized than the local people in the thinking. It's like, it's like discredit. Hey, I'm not looking at you as brothers and sisters. I'm looking at myself as I'm a what's it called, naturalized citizen, and I am gonna be such a patriotic, and they lose the commonality that their forefathers and mothers experienced when they were here working, and the solidarity that was there. You know what I'm saying? So you're right. So there is definitely, I think, an era where it's like that was a mindset then, and then change in that era where this a new quote unquote system is in place. Now it's like, okay, this is a script that people are to follow now. You know,
Mhm.
follow the script.
Right. And it's such a shameful thing to say that we come from these people. You know, it's really shameful because to say the least, right? Well, to say it in this way that even in the other Caribbean, there was this color blindedness that was taking place. It wasn't just unique to the Virgin Islands. It was a Caribbean thing. In fact, the Caribbean people looked at America with awe and glory and wanted to be a part of that. That was the thing. Any chance they get into an American territory, they would go for it because of this idea of of progress that could be made. Now, on the other hand of that is that looking at it straight across the board, we look down upon the African people in the United States as like, wow, these people got it so good. Why they just don't relax their bombo? How you say humble their bombo, and just you know be good subservient people. That was the thing because a lot of Caribbean people talk down when they're referring to blacks. You know what I'm saying? And I hate to use that word black, but we're using it now. When they're talking about the melanated American people, um, they would talk down about them, right? And all too eager to go work under the white man and be his humble pie, like, yo, oh yeah, man, you know, and so that is a part of the reality that we face today. You know what I mean? Because many of them would was here with the civil rights movement taking place and
Mm.
to it. Like that didn't think. In fact, I could talk about my own family who would glorify. I heard something come out my aunt mouth one time, like we need to have a white governor again because on the Paiwanski, this place was good. Things was happening. We need to get a white government back in the. And I looked at her and I was like, Auntie, you really, really believe so? She said yes. She said yes. She said we can't run nothing. And to a point, she's right because this has allowed us not to be in a position to expand our mind beyond that veil that is
Mm.
placed in front of us. So of course, yeah, we do a poor, crappy job trying to be
Right.
white, right?
Right.
Yeah,
It's I mean, it's not funny, but it's like the word and the mentality. And I shouldn't say I'm not classifying all. Um, wow, let me find the right words, because to have a mindset where you purposely want to dominate another people, that's white-minded. I'm gonna say white-minded. So it's not about the the complexion or the color of the people. It's a thinking. It's
it's
a
a mindset,
mindset.
right?
It's a
Right.
mindset because I know of lighter people, right?
Call them Caucasians,
Well, I'll say whiter people. You say Caucasian, no? But I'll
but
say
that's what their name is.
I'll say that the mindset of some of them that I know is not of a dominating mindset as some of those others. Okay, so that it goes again is wow, it's so deep. It's a deep discussion because you have dark skin,
Right.
you have light skinned people who are white minded. And until we change from that white mindset to a mind
That is
which
all embracing,
is all exactly and
understanding,
fair,
and respecting, right?
exactly,
On some firm principle.
we will
Because
continue to be in a state of devaluing ourselves,
right,
not embracing, as Mary was saying, our hair, and knowing that, hey,
right,
our hair can grow as long. It may not be straight
right,
as the others, but our hair have the capability of getting long. But we have to embrace our kinkiness. You
right,
know what I'm saying?
right.
That is who we are.
Right, and let me just put it this way, and this is gonna be a strong language, right?
Don't make it too strong because we
I hate white people. I did say it.
don't you ban us from
No,
YouTube now.
in black skins and white people that are in fair skins. Whiteness is a mindset. Or I hope you two don't ban it. But whiteness is a mindset. It's not it's not a color of your skin, because there are people that are not melanated that I could reason with, and I could embrace, and I could say that's my brother, because the
Absolutely.
mind,
Sisters, I know
you
people
understand
are
what
that
I'm
straight
saying?
up.
The mind is not white. When you have a white mind, the white mind is a mind that always seeks to dominate, is opportunistic. It's always, they call it capitalist, right? And we define ourselves by this thing because, straight up, I am not black either. I dislike black people too. You
So what
understand?
is black
I
in your
hate black
definition?
people. When I say that, I am going to say it that it's the mindset. Black people are acting as the structure defines them to be. You see what I'm saying?
So I know time has called. I guess give another example as far as the structure wanting them to be,
Black people
and I
are
guess
those people that are socially engineered to act and behave a certain way. Just like white people are a socially engineered people, right, to behave and act and think a certain way.
okay.
White people think about dominating, controlling, coercing, you know, every other person that is not white minded.
So let it be clearer and clearer to
Right.
what the distinctions are being
Black
made.
people
Our mind
are
set.
socially engineered to be coons, um, to be ignorant, to be unintelligent. I'm gonna say it because we need to get appropriate what we really are. I'm not black. I am a melanated being, right? White people didn't exist before. I think is what, the late 1700s.
You're
Prior
saying
to
white
that,
people or the labeling of
white
people?
labeling, white labeling.
Mm.
Because before that, go back to the refer to themselves as white. They refer to themselves as Greeks, as Romans, as English, as British, as French.
Mm.
They never related themselves. They never look at themselves as being white. And if anybody will watch this, you'll understand what we mean about whiteness, white-mindedness. Whiteness is not about skin color. 'Cause there's nobody white. There's no such thing. Human beings come in all
This
hues.
this is this is
Right,
this is white. Have you
right,
anyone saw a white person
right,
like
right,
this? So let's be real. You know what
right.
I'm saying?
So there is a thinking that perpetuates no such thing as a white person. But there's a thinking. And there's a thinking for black people too. And I hate both black and white people. People who fall into those labels and grasp those labels, that fall into that social engineering construct. Yeah, I'm talking to you.
But
But
what,
melanated people, clear folk, what you want to call them, less melanated people, people with straight hair, I have no hatred for. If you're coming with a mind about human beings, about being human minded person, not someone that's going to be falling between the lines of division of white, black, red. No, human.
all right. Last words. I know we.
We are all one. We are all one. What separates us is that stinking thinking. You know what I'm saying? What bring us down is our thinking. We must recognize that there's only one humanity.
Right.
There's only one, you know what I'm saying? This white, it's all within the mind.
And I'll give a quick example in my last words as far as the reasoning part is that, so I had a discussion with someone and she gave the example. Um, there are butterflies, right?
Mhm.
There are yellow butterflies. There are orange black butterflies. There are black butterflies. But guess what? They are all butterflies.
Mhm.
So, we come in different complexion
Shades, right.
shades, but we are human beings. There are certain distinctions, even though, but the general thing is that we are human.
Mind.
So,
It's a social engineering. It's a social construct.
yeah.
Because you could have white people, you drop them in the middle of the forest, never been raised with no other thing, and
Well,
you drop them side
people
by
that you
side.
call that
That they
they're
call
called
themselves
white.
white. I'm talking about light folk. You know what I'm saying? The lighter hue of people. You drop them in the forest, darker hue person. And if there's no outside force tinkering with the mind, them two people will grow up as brothers.
Yeah, so you know what? Yes, indeed. I mean, that is totally true. So I'll be straight up. It's like growing up, when I was young, I had a neighbor, different neighbors that were lighter complexion. Their mom was of French descent, However, we were neighbors and we were just like sisters and brothers, and we shared, partying and clubhouse and stuff like that. Just in that natural way of being, human beings. It's not until later on as things that we were exposed, okay, to things on the television and seeing separation of how whites were against blacks and stuff like that. We were innocent in just being, natural as human beings. But then it's like, oh wow, is that how we supposed to be? Are we supposed to be separated from each other because the complexion of your skin? But otherwise we would have been separated, truly separated, but we grew up still looking at each other and treating each other as brothers and sisters. But this discussion is worth continuing, and definitely I encourage ones to really dive deeper and see the trap that some of the mindset has set for us as human beings. They find ways to separate us because they know in unity we are strong, and knowing that the divisive, I'm calling it evil ways that they want to continue to doing.
Right.
So it's going to take time, but you have to be determined to know,
Yes, sir.
find yourself. That's very important, and find the truth. Get in tune with nature and just observe things for yourself. Likewise. But there is definitely a lot of work to do. I want to give thanks to Mario Moorhead Marcy Moorhead for that the book because it's continuing things that we didn't know, things that we do need to know about our history and start questioning and asking ourselves, is this the type of construct we want to continue to be in or not?
Right.
So yeah, and then Mario is on radio. It's a radio program, I think from 3 to 9 o'clock p.m. on WSTX.
Mhm.
What is the FM? My gosh, I think the FM is 100.3.
100. No, 97X. It's
That it
also
is.
okay. See, I don't know. So it's 100.3.
Okay,
Okay.
FM. So definitely you want to check and listen to that radio station because he's taken his time now because that's sponsored by Yuka Africa House Club. So it's definitely going to bring more awareness to people, and definitely feel free to call in and ask the author of the book that we've been reading for these past months.
Right.
You know, ask them questions, be enlightened.
Right. So before we close, I just want to say one blood, one humanity. If you cut a white man, not even a white man. I need to stop using that.
I know that's
Let's
why I said
call
it's
them
gonna take a while.
Caucasians. You cut that man's skin. What color he bleed?
First it will be black and then and red.
No, but at the end of the day, you cut a Chinese man. What color you gonna bleed?
Right.
You cut a quote unquote African person, African descendant person. What what are they going to
What
bleed?
color they will bleed?
The
So red.
only thing that differentiates us is where on the planet we were, right?
And to an extent too now, I mean we could go deep in this the blood type too, because there's a
Well,
difference.
as a person who is African, all Africans don't carry the same blood type,
That's what I'm saying.
right? And same way you can have people who are quote unquote who are Caucasians
They don't
that
carry the
carry
same.
that carry different. You could find a Caucasian carrying O.
Right. And
You
they
understand what I'm
exactly.
saying?
So you'll find some Caucasians with AB, and that just as you will find a dark skinned person carrying AB. So this here is determined to know the truth. First, you find yourself more, you learn about you, and then you will. Once you do, the door is gonna open. It's gonna
Get rid of
expose
those
things
labels.
that you know exactly, and you'll see things.
Hate those labels.
Yes, for
I'm
yourself.
serious.
So let's
White,
just.
black, whatever.
So
Get rid of them
yes.
things. Dash them in the fire. Burn that.
I was going to
Yeah.
be a bit tired, but now I'm so getting so excited.
Yes,
But
go ahead.
it's time to go. It's time to go. I definitely appreciate those who were able to tune in while we were on. Bless Brother Joseph. And for those who will be viewing the recording, thank you again. Join us on Wednesdays, except the first Wednesday, because the first Wednesday is Sanctuary Council of Elders is actually next week, Wednesday. So we won't have our African Heritage Study next Wednesday. Please get the newspaper while it's still available, of course, at www.ucu.webs.com or go to Moja Caribbean Union Inc. departments on Facebook and go to file, download your copy of the newspaper. A lot of things to share in the remaining time. Community announcement page. So tomorrow is what? Thursday, Friday. I don't think anything is posted here. Sunday is Sacred Council of Elders Healing Hearts Gathering. And let me tell you something, the heart is something else, okay? We really, really, really have to pay attention to our heart and what we put in our minds that's going to be affecting our heart, put it in our minds, it causing us to eat certain things that's unhealthy, putting things in our body that is going to affect our heart. We really have to pay attention. So I really hope that ones could go and attend this Healing Heart Gathering that is 5:30 p.m. at the Frederickson Community Garden. Kemetic Yoga with Darshania. It won't have any this Sunday. Um, she may be out for about 2 weeks, but definitely please check her on Facebook at Darshania or email her at darshania.info@gmail.com for further information. And again, on Sunday, yeah, this I would share more information. So at Sunday, Jahil Development Initiative presents Mario Moorhead Community Book Reading at 5:30 p.m. at the George Center. Readers are always needed, so please contact Marilyn and Aisha Hodge at 340-626-5329. Again, 340-626-5329. Community service hours will be given to high school students that participate in the reading.
Sorry.
All right, we are almost through. We are almost through, and I'm appreciating the work that. Oh, let me just share this quickly because we're boiling down on our Kwanzaa Everyday Initiative. So although it's not posted in the November newspaper, you're getting it first here on this program. That uh, Power Couple Retreat is going to take place December 31st, 2021. Space is limited, 10 couples. Let me just read it quickly. To strengthen and preserve the sacred traditional union between man and woman, definitely growing stronger together in 2022. Please attend this New Year's Eve event. Um, Learn ways to create deeper connections in the kitchen by learning new recipes and to spice up your taste for each other and reaffirm your bond by discovering creative ways to strengthen the relationship, self accountability, and putting a little more effort into the relationship. Identifying shared hobbies, building trust, working towards relationship goals. You're gonna be guided by Empress Aishiba, who's a mental health and wellness consultant. Let's see what else. Let our powers combine. So you definitely learn techniques on how to synergize. All right. So again, this is gonna be December 31st, and it's $100 per couple. So with all that and more, let me see. The proceeds will go towards UCU Kwanzaa Everyday Initiative. So please check out our website and you'll get more information. And I hope couples out there that you will definitely make that effort. You have to be determined to, make sure you have a solid foundation in your relationship. Okay. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
Yes.
One love.
All right. Do
Enjoy.
your best. Bless.